I'm not sure that I am ambitious, to be fair. Uh, I'm keen to keep living for a while longer. That's a sort of a good ambition, I think. I'm ambitious maybe to see my grandchildren survive what looks like a pretty horrific world that they're going to be living in. And so that probably translates into having as many conversations as possible to really get to the heart of how they're seeing their world.
Welcome, Ian.
Thank you. Welcome to you too. Even though I'm in your space.
You're in my studio, my Ambitious and Unconventional studio. So you are my second guest on this kind of relaunch of Ambitious and Unconventional. And I'm curious about where this conversation is going to go with you. So we'll just
Find out.
We'll find out. So I'm going to start with the question, what are you ambitious about?
Wow. That's a great question because it's not something that's ever crossed my mind in the last sort of 15 years. I'm not sure that I am ambitious, to be fair. I'm keen to keep living for a while longer. That's a sort of a good ambition, I think. And it translates a little bit into looking after what I eat and stuff and exercising. I'm ambitious maybe to see my grandchildren survive what looks like a pretty horrific world that they're going to be living in. And so that probably translates into having as many conversations as possible to really get to the heart of how they're seeing their world. I don't know I'm ambitious much professionally anymore. I don't really think I've any more mountains to climb or any more windmills to tilt at. And it probably plays into a sort of a disenchantment with the whole notion of purpose, which I'm not really sure about anymore, or niche or space or any of that. I was talking to my own supervisor some time back, and she talked about the wisdom of no space. And I think that's...
No space?
Yeah, taking up nowhere, saying this isn't my space. And so I think that's my ambition maybe is to explore that further. So it's the ambition, really.
There's lots of threads that I could pull on there, and I'm deciding which one. What are you... you said that you were ambitious about your grandchildren.
Yeah.
I can't remember the words that you used, sort of, I guess, thriving in this world that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd go so far as thriving, but anyway, yeah.
Or I think maybe you said surviving, and I think maybe I paraphrased or added in my own positive spin. What are you... Would you want to share more about that?
Yeah, I would. I think the context of the world that they're growing up in is, from where I look, and of course, I'm bearing witness to the world as I see it and its behaviours, and that's coloured a bit by my own projections, my own transferences, all that kind of stuff. So it's the world as I see it. It's, one of my grandchildren is gay. I think the world will be difficult for her, just looking at how it seems to be going. Quite a few are neurodivergent, and I think the world will be difficult for them. I think the American categorization of autism as a disease that can be cured, I believe, by drinking bleach is frightening. I think that the oligarchical nature of the tech bros who kind of want to control the planet. I think that will make it a difficult place for people who don't subscribe to that as being a good thing. And I think humanity is. I think there's a lot of othering in the world. That's really what I'm saying. I think somehow, somewhere is deciding, or somebody somewhere, or some group somewhere is deciding that ruling by dividing is the quickest way to gaining control. And I wouldn't want to be young growing up in that.
Do you think that's a new thing?
And not in philosophy. I think that's kind of how, when you go back as far as you want to go, Hannibal and the elephants and all the rest of it. But I do think it's a new thing in terms of the how rather than the what. And I think it's much more insidious. It's much more invasive. And there's much more of a link now between, well, probably there's a link between, I think, control and the means of control that was never quite there before. Yeah.
I wonder whether that part of that is down to when you talk about the means of control, I wonder whether the technology that we have and that's causing the difference that you speak of.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I'm a huge fan. I mean, I'm conflicted because I'm a real big fan of technology. I think AI is magnificent in many ways. I think it's a pity that somehow the history and the trajectory of technology has been hijacked by a love of money. I mean, in the beginning, everything was open source. The internet was a gift for everybody and all that. And it was high-minded. But somehow the people who invented the internet haven't held on to ideals in the same way as the people who invented Ben and Jerry's ice cream. And maybe because Ben and Jerry's ice cream wasn't seen as a way of controlling the world, though it's pretty darn good.
Yeah. What kind of, when you said you're trying to have as many conversations as possible, and I heard that as with your grandchildren, but also with everyone.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I wonder what kind of conversations you are trying to have.
I don't think I'm trying to. I'm trying to have conversations. I'm trying to be curious. I'm really trying to be curious. So, for instance, when the 14-year-old, I walked into the room and just out of nowhere, she said, "So, do you think it's possible for two people to exchange consciousness? And if they did, what would happen?" I thought, well, let's treat this as a serious question. And let's treat this as a serious conversation, as opposed to being a patronizing adult. And let's really see what's behind it. And it was interesting. I don't want to really unfold what I discovered was behind it, but it was an interesting insight into where she was at in terms of identity and all that kind of thing at the moment. Yeah.
She's 14. Were you thinking about consciousness at 14?
I don't know if I knew there was a consciousness when I was 14.
Yeah.
I was thinking about impressing girls.
Yeah. I don't think I was thinking about consciousness at 14. Do you think that is, do you think that because you probably have more interaction with that younger generation because of your grandchildren than I do. Do you think that they are growing up with a different level of consciousness and a different mind than you did and I did?
I think that's interesting. I think there've always been those of us who had obsessions in growing up. Do you know, are we obsessed with becoming a DJ, and are we obsessed with cars? Are we obsessed with sport? What are we obsessed in or with? And I think that it's just a wider range of things that kids can get obsessed with. And it probably passes them, and they move on to something else. You know.
Interesting.
For that
Because
child, you know, last year it was NASA and space and all the rest of it, you know. So I suppose there's a logic progression from stars to consciousness, but then again, it may be a complete non sequitur. I don't know.
yeah, I'm just not sure whether it was 40 years ago for most kids. I don't know.
You know, kids were collecting car badges, and, you know, but there was still obsession.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what conversations are you having that matter to you around this with people that are not your grandchildren?
Yeah. I have a. I don't think it's my responsibility or anything, so I don't have like some sort of a feeling of mission or purpose or whatever. I don't have that. I just have interest in how people in the coaching world are seeing life at the moment. Because I think it's a time for assessing how we see life. And the question, what's the point of us? In one shape, size, form, or another. Surfaces a lot if we give it oxygen, I think. I think in terms of, I think I find a lot of people that want to stifle that conversation or want to answer it in ways that are quite formulaic. But I do find a growing number of coaches are really engaging with, well, what really are we all about? You know, what does it even mean to say coach?
And why you said it's not necessarily coming from a place of purpose, or it's more from a place of curiosity. What is driving that curiosity for you?
I wonder, is curiosity not its own driver? I'm just thinking, you know, what my optician guy, I mean, and I've often wondered about how clean his hands are, but his hobby is to take cars apart on his kitchen bench. You know, and I've asked him, you know, why do you do this? And he says, well, because they're there. You know, it's a bit like the, you know, why do you climb the mountain thing? Well, because it's there. So I wonder sometimes, for some of us, are we insatiably curious about stuff simply because they're there to be curious about, as opposed to, I'm curious because I want to do something or other.
Is it related to your? Can I ask you about your presentation that you did?
Oh, you can ask, yes, you can indeed.
So is it because I just think it's a fascinating topic, and is that curiosity of having conversations with coaches about how they see the world, how we see the world, is that related to this topic of yours that you are also curious about, which is your Quaker spirituality and leadership development?
Yeah, okay, that's great, that question. So I go back to Ken Wilber, really. I mean, as you know, and you know, you and I have both been involved in this adult development world for some time, and the whole question of our sense making, meaning making, evolving, and whatever. I had questions, and I wanted to explore those questions. And then I came across the Wilber thing about the growing up and the waking up and the cleaning up and the showing up, because that was my fundamental question. Is how I see the world? Does it always show up in how I inhabit the world? And I felt that for me, it probably didn't. Um, and I wanted to look at that. So I got into the Wilber thing, and the waking up is the spirituality piece. Uh, and then I kind of found that there were some developmentalists put their focus on spirituality. This would be back in the 80s. So I was interested in what they found. And then I noticed that a couple of them had highlighted Quaker spirituality as being quite a developed form of spirituality. And so, with the arrogance of every researcher, I thought I'll look into that. I took a crazily small sample of people, from which really I could only conclude that from my small sample, it was not inconsistent with what these developmentalists were saying. Now, that's a very tenuous conclusion to make, not inconsistent from a small sample. Wouldn't be a resounding endorsement of the whole level of Quaker spirituality. And then my second piece was, well, have you got anything that you can apply into leadership? And that was really springing for me. There's a quote from, I can never pronounce, because A, it's French, and I failed O-level French 3 times, but also because I'm not even sure at the moment that I can even remember how it's spelled. But anyway, there was a guy some centuries ago, Pierre, or maybe it was just the last century. See, my knowledge here, but technical knowledge is weak. But Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, ooh, that was close. He said, we're not humans seeking to be spiritual, but we're spiritual beings having a human experience. Now, that for me was a bit of a head turner, because I thought, well, if that's the case, exploring spirituality is actually an exploration of humanity, because we already have the spirit. It's already there. So how do we be human? And so that to me was interesting, because that then brought right into leadership the question of what really. And I saw it. A friend of mine, Julia Quebec, she sent me a LinkedIn, an article there yesterday, and it had in it, when we're looking for leadership development, what are we trying to develop? Are we asking the question, what kind of people are morally suitable to be leaders in the world? And are we working towards preparing that and working towards that? And on the one hand, I thought, well, who am I to judge who's morally suitable for anything? And secondly, I thought that's quite a nice way to look at things. So there's a little bit of ambiguity there. I don't know where I've gone in this conversation. You better ask me another question.
Well, it definitely, I think, is showing your curiosity, right? And that's what I was wondering about, is this where this curiousness comes from to have conversations about how people are seeing the world. And ultimately, I guess, coaches, the people that you're working with and having conversations with, most of us work with what we might call leaders in corporate organizations and business. The question, the question that comes up for me, and perhaps for those listening, because I think we all see things through different lenses, and I wonder what spirituality means to you as we're talking about it.
Great question. I think it's to do with engaging with the mysterious that sits beyond the material. Well, that sounds almost like it's a soundbite, but it sounds a little bit pretentious as well. But I think that if I have an understanding that uh, I'm part of something, I hesitate to say I'm a being because I think that A, I'm a becoming rather than a being, and B, I'm not convinced that I'm a I'm a single entity. You're a single entity. I think we're all interwoven. So with those caveats, uh, I think I think that we're all connected to each other and connected to something much deeper than what we see with our eyes, and that seems to be rooted in the material. We seem to be so we're living in this world. So we're connected by this thing that's beyond what we see. But we're living in a world that's highly dominated by what we see and what we can amass and who we can influence. And so that, I think, makes us more mechanical as opposed to human. And so for me, spirituality is a kind of a diving in to recovering a greater understanding of who we as a unity really are. That sounds so friggin' pretentious. Do you know?
Well, it's interesting to me that you're saying that, and that there's this judgment.
It's not a judgment. It is a judgment. It is absolutely judgment. It's because I have a pathological disregard for people that take themselves too seriously. You know,
Yes, you
and
do.
it just sounds like, wow, he takes himself so friggin' seriously.
Yeah. And I think that that's sometimes what puts people off from conversations about spirituality or the mysterious, or is it can feel sometimes serious and heavy and pretentious, and so it's
Yeah.
kind of, have you heard the term woo woo?
Oh, I love woo. I'm a big fan of woo woo. I think woo is
Yeah.
great.
But I do think it also, I think, and this is perhaps where the waking up, growing up, showing up piece comes in, because I think if you are only solely curious about spirituality, and you can get a bit serious, you can, if you're not working on the other areas, then
Yeah.
you can feel, you can almost find your own, perhaps, I don't know if this is the right phrase, but your own self-importance or something in spirituality.
Couldn't agree more. Because it lends itself. I mean, well, it lends itself, I think, because of our limitation with language.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
so, yeah, and it's a bit like quantum science, quantum physics. There's a bit of a limitation with language there in my sound, but actually, on quantum, I find that beer really helps to understand, and I suspect with spirituality, we're helped. If we drink a bit as we're discussing it, because we can lose ourselves. And I mean, I say that flippantly, but we need something, I think, to kind of loosen our hold on a dichotomy, an artificial dichotomy that says we've got to change our language as soon as we
yeah,
talk about this, because we don't. We don't need to change our language.
yeah.
Um, and so, I suppose to go back to answer your question in non-changed language, I'd say for me, spirituality is just it's just a focus being together with other people and being in the world in a way that isn't transactional and isn't exploitative.
Yes. I love that. I was going to ask how this, because you wrote a beautiful Substack article, yes, Monday, and you talked about this realization of the oneness of you and I in the and I say you and I in a general sense, in the conversations that you have. I'm paraphrasing there, but I'm curious about how this curiosity that you have shows up in your conversations.
I suppose, and how am I going to say this without the damn pretentious language? Okay, let me try.
Try. Say it, just say it.
I think because the longer I live, the more I realize that in order to find out about myself, I have to find out about others. Because I am in them and they're in me and we're in each other. Now I can go into I'm the Walrus. We could sing that Beatles song, I'm the Walrus.
I
Anyway,
don't know
sorry.
that song, but
You
yeah.
don't know that? That's a classic song. I am you and you are me and we're all... It required a lot of drugs to get there. But anyway, we're now... I think we just realize if we want to meet ourselves, we have to meet other people.
Yeah. Yeah. I experience that a lot, all the time through my coaching. And it's that real dance of having that experience of meeting myself through others, whilst also remaining in a... You talked at the beginning about like this non-space. I don't know if that's the right...
Yeah.
But remaining in this like non-space of just also being with the other person and listening and asking questions and, I don't know, being of value or service to them. But so there's a lot going on in a coaching moment.
There's a lot going on. Yes, there is, and I think we can kid ourselves a lot. I think that's, speaking from experience, I think I can kid myself a lot. I think this sort of sense of being in service. That's the thing you asked about the conference. It was actually, I totally screwed up the conference, to be honest, because everybody else had papers written and I kind of went along and just sort of talked. I missed, when they said, would you present a paper and the clue was in the name? And I kind of went over my head. But anyway, I just went along and talked and it was okay-ish. But it got interesting when a guy asked a question and he said, leading with love, is that the same as being a servant leader? And I heard myself say no, because I might have, if I'd used my brain, I probably would have said yes, and that would have been the question over. But I said no, and then I thought, shit, I better expand on this. And I thought, well, if I say that I'm a servant leader or I'm coaching in service, I am still othering the other person. I'm saying, if there's a leader and a led, there's a coach and a coachee, and there are boundaries, and the boundaries aren't porous. And so I began to talk about that, and I was quite actually astonished at how that went down with these people. It was like people had been waiting to hear this, and I thought, yeah, I've probably been waiting too, because I didn't know it was coming till it came. I think for me, there's a difference between saying, I'm going to see aspects of myself through working with you. I'm going to recognize bits about me through hearing you, and saying I'm actually physically going to meet myself. Because we are, this is a pretentious thing again, but we are, how does Eterio Fallon put it, we're interpenetrative. If there wasn't me, there wouldn't be a me. If there wasn't a, so we're not separate entities having a conversation. We genuinely are all part of the same being. And therefore, and that leads into the whole Martin Buber stuff about I, it, and I, thou. We try to get to I, thou by numbers usually. We think, well, I'm going to reveal a bit about me. But I'm coming. Sorry. Yeah.
No, there's a transaction in that a little bit, isn't there?
Yeah. Yeah, there is. And I have a feeling now more and more it's realizing that we're two interwoven human beings entering a dark tunnel, and it'll take two of us to get ourselves out of that. Now that sounds remarkably friggin', metaphysical and blah blah, but what can I say?
I think you've got to accept this pretentious thing.
I got to wear it. Yeah,
You got to wear it.
Pretentious fecker. Okay, let's just.
It reminds me. There's a. I think his name is Father Greg Boyle. I think I've got that right, and he runs a non-profit in LA called Homeboy Industries, where they rehabilitate gang members, and he's amazing. And he talks about cherishing people, and he describes cherishing as love with your sleeves rolled up, which I think is really lovely. But he also talks about allowing yourself to be changed by, so you're not going and rehabilitating somebody or trying to change them. You are also allowing yourself to be changed by them too. It's a reciprocal relationship.
It absolutely is. It kind of takes me back to that, just thinking about that. I mean, I began my working life as a youth worker in the middle of the conflict here in Ireland. So I was working with a lot of guys who were basically paramilitary people, and their malls. All that. That's how it was back then. And again, I think that's when I began to think I can find myself in these people, because they had aspirational stuff that I probably didn't have. I mean, they had aspirations politically, they had aspirations socially, they had aspirations, and their commitment to violence was kind of because they felt that those aspirations were being challenged, threatened, taken away, and they were feeling more marginalized. And I've never been marginalized. So that was interesting to, that was so helpful for me to actually mix with the people who were marginalized and to see maybe how I'd seen them before. I was just actually judging aspects of me that had never been exposed before.
Yeah. Yeah. Can we allow ourselves to see ourselves in everybody that we meet, that we judge, that we see, even in media, and there's something in everyone that is in us, whether we like it or not.
Well, whether we recognize it or not, yeah. I mean, that is the Quaker thing, the one thing, we don't really talk about God much because that's a kind of a metaphysical concept out there, but we say there's something in everybody that is of God. So if you want to have an encounter with God, you encounter as many people as possible. And it's profoundly a human thing. Yeah.
I'm thinking about how we might
Yeah, I'm just following you.
Conversation and
how will we land this plane?
Yeah. There was. I do want to. I think maybe we'll continue a conversation next time about this notion of servant leadership, because it doesn't sit right with me either. I think it inherently speaks of hierarchy and difference, and like you said, otherness. Yeah. So how do we want to land this plane? Good question. How might we? What might be one? I don't know why I'm asking you for a tip, and you're probably going to laugh at me. But what's one thing that you do to not other the other?
Great question. I think for me, it is a bit rooted in this concept of that of God being everybody. That at the end of the day, I've got one bit of a jigsaw, of a divine jigsaw, and if I'm a spiritual being or whatever, then I've got one bit of a spiritual jigsaw, and you've got a bit, and somebody else has a bit. So if I put someone outside kind of outside the line of if I other them, I'm othering bits of myself. I really desperately need to uncover. And if that's the first thing. The second thing, I saw this comic. She was a wonderful comedian. Really, I can't remember her name, but she said she's autistic, and she said there are two responses. One of the ones are overtly other, and then the other ones who try to compensate. And so they look at her and they say, "That's your superpower, darling." And she says, "Look, it wouldn't have been much of a film if Superman, instead of being able to fly through the air and move mountains, had been able to talk for an hour on Sylvia Plath." And I thought, wow, she's right. The being comfortable in the presence of difference, without becoming one of those people who, from their privilege, say things like "I never see color" and all that. But if we actually become, here we go again, like a citizen of it all, or a part of it all rather than a whole entity, well, then we are othering. If we other, we're othering ourselves.
Yeah, getting comfortable with difference. I think perhaps that's the task of our lives, in a way.
I think so, yeah. But, people are so beautiful. That is the thing. There's a wonderful Mary Oliver poem which says that when death comes, she'd like to be remembered as someone who was married to amazement. And I think that's a great way to pass through the earth. When we really, I don't know anybody. Even number 47 there in the White House. There are elements of quite astonishing things in how he approaches the world that I wouldn't do it, and I don't like it. But that doesn't mean liking it's not really relevant. There's part of me in the president really of America, and there's part of him in me, and yeah. So that's I think that's as coaches saying there's me and my coachee.
Yeah. Being remembered as married to amazement. Love that. Okay, let's land the plane there. Thank you.
Pleasure.
And we shall talk again.
We will.
Thank you, Ian.
Pleasure. Thank you.